And as I look around, I see many, many people I know, our partners with whom we've worked, who work with kids. And I know that every single person in here understands how important it is to intervene early with our young people. Because the more they get into the system, the harder it is to get out and the fewer services there are. So we're here to talk about our Youth Auto Initiative, and that was created a little over a year ago. So we are here to talk about what the initiative is, and to give you some really exciting data about how well it's working. So let me talk a little bit about the evolution of it. A year ago, when I came into office, I was talking to law enforcement partners. And one of the things you probably all know or are aware of is that car thefts went up. And it was the one crime that was still staying up there. Most other crime is going down statistically, but car theft was still really high. And we know that the clearance rates, in other words, the cases that police are able to identify a person and get a case to us for charging were very low, about 2% countywide. And that was for a number of reasons. We know that a number of young people were in cars and crashing them and running away and really engaging in behavior that was dangerous to themselves and our community members. And so what we did was think about it, and I say we, it was really our youth prosecution team, and that's Sarah Davis and Morgan Kuntz, and Kenneth Garnier, really thought through, what do we do? How can we help young people? The other really important factor here is when you look at the data, young people now who are involved in car theft very quickly escalate within a matter of months to something more dangerous. Carjacking, robbery, having a gun. And I know I'm telling the choir here a lot of this, but it's really important that it escalates that quickly because we have to intervene early. So what do? We know law enforcement is having a really difficult time sending the county attorney's office cases, but we also know that young people's behavior is escalating to a point where somebody is going to be harmed or they are going to get harmed. So in the past, the county attorney's office would have said and did say, there really is nothing that we can do. Unless you can bring us a case, a chargeable case, we have no role. We wanted to do something different because we believe that prevention and intervention early is the way we keep kids from getting into the system, getting further into the system, and really drawn into the prison. So we wanted to intervene. What we did was meet with law enforcement and say, you know the young people who are engaged in risky behavior. So you can't bring us cases, but you know the names of young people. What if we met with you and you shared with us those names and we ran them through our databases, which includes youth prosecution, child protection, and the county behavioral health system would run those names through as well. One thing that all of you might not know, so even though I'm the county attorney, Sarah is the head of our youth division and families division, our child protection data cannot be shared with our lawyers in youth prosecution. It's just data can't be shared. I can see it, Sarah can see it, but other people can't. That also means we can't, and we wouldn't want to share child protection data and other protected data to law enforcement. So we would run a youth through our database, and we would find out if that youth was system involved in any way. If that youth was, we would make sure that whatever system they were involved with knew that that kid was engaging in risky behavior. Our Youth Auto Initiative was about the kids who were not already involved. And I'm not going to get too much into that because I know Sarah and Morgan and Kenneth are going to talk about what exactly we do, what kind of services are offered, and the success that we've had. But I just want to emphasize again, and I want to give a shout out. I know there are a lot of people in this room that are doing the work. You are doing the work in community to help young people, to keep them from getting into the system, to keep them from getting deeper into the system. We as a county attorney's office recognize that work. We are really trying to expand our ability to partner with you And our goal is to keep young people from coming into the system. I'm gonna end on one thing. One thing that I have realized as county attorney, when I came in, I realized that youth, young people, were gonna be a really critical part of what we did as a county attorney's office. One thing I have done is I have had to look at studies of young people who are under 18 who have committed violent crimes. We get certification studies, we get psychological studies, and one thing that is true in every single one of those kids' cases is that they had a tremendous history of trauma. The other thing that happens with each of those cases is that there was not an effective intervention for that young person. So every case that I have seen those kind of reports on, I think to myself, had we effectively intervened with this young person, we wouldn't be here today. And that's really important. I know some people will say, well, why don't you just prosecute crime? Everybody in this room knows we would rather prevent it than be meeting with victims as I did yesterday. Victims who've lost a loved one to gun violence. We don't want to be there. And that young person and their family and the community doesn't want to be there. We need to stop being there, and we need to start implementing effective interventions early on to keep young people from getting down that road. So I'm going to hand it over to Sarah Davis.
Thank you, Mary. And as Mary said, my name is Sarah Davis. I am the director of our Children and Families Division, and really grateful to see so many folks out here tonight to join us in this conversation about, as Mary said, how are we doing our work differently to improve outcomes for youth and families and community. So I'm going to take a few minutes and talk about our approach to youth justice in our office, because I know there's a lot of questions about that. And then how does that play out in this process? I'm going to invite Morgan Coons and Kenneth Garnier to join me in this conversation, and then we hope that you'll engage in dialogue with us about this. So just generally, speaking about our approach to youth justice in the Hennepin County Attorney's Office is fundamentally about improving community safety and well-being through both individual and system accountability. That leads to positive outcomes for youth, families, and their communities, while also centering victims and their healing. So that's a lot. How do we do all of that? We take a positive youth development approach, which says that young people bring strengths and assets, and young people and their families bring strengths and assets, and how do we build on those? We are grounded in youth development, research, and science. So we know that young people's brains are still developing until their mid-20s. It doesn't mean that they can't be held accountable. Please never hear me say that. Young people can be held accountable, but we want to do it in a way that's meaningful and that changes behavior, right? And that children are children, right? They're not just small adults. There are fundamental differences between young people and adults. And, you know, people, all of us have children in our lives, whether they are our own children, our nieces and nephews, grandchildren's, neighbors, kids. We all have young people in our lives. And if you've spent time with young people, you know that they're different, right? And that they're still developing. So what does this lead us to? This is a little bit of a synthesis of a lot of research and data that's out there. But what we know from the research and data is that interventions with young people are most effective when, one, they're immediate, as close in time as possible to the behavior, right? You cannot, I mean you can, but it's not super effective. You can't wait 6 months to impose a consequence of accountability about something that happened with a young person, because for them, that might be the prior school year, right? Like that's way too long. It needs to be as close in time as possible to the behavior. It needs to be relational, so accountability to those who have been most impacted. And that can be the person that they hurt, it can be their family, their parent, their grandparent, their auntie who had to take time off of work to be with them through this process. Something that I've learned, I've been in this work for a really long time, even though I've been at the county attorney's office only since Mary took over, but you know, something I've learned in my work as both an attorney and a restorative practitioner is that all people, but young people in particular are more accountable to relationships than they are to rules, right? And I think if we reflect on that for ourselves for a moment, like we know that to be true. And so how do we engage in relational accountability? Because that's what's fundamentally going to change behavior. It needs to be individualized. So as I said earlier, young people and their families bring incredible strengths. And so often in the youth justice system, we're just seeing young people and their families from a deficit-based lens. So how are we accounting for their strengths and building on those strengths while addressing barriers and concerns? And then it needs to be community-based. And I think sometimes when I talk about this, folks think, well, even for the most serious thing, like you want to divert people who shoot folks, right? And that's not what I'm saying. Community-based applies whether it's for pre-charge diversion or for a young person who needs to be placed outside of their home, right? We need to be wrapping supports and services around young people in their community because we know even young people who commit the most serious offenses are coming back to their community. They're coming back. And the best way to ensure that they're going to be safe moving forward and that we're going to have community safety moving forward is to wrap resources and supports around them. So we could talk about this all night, but we're not going to. I want to move to talk about how is the Youth Auto Theft Early Intervention Initiative an example of how we put this philosophy into practice. Okay, so Mary talked about this a little bit, but when Mary came into office and she and I were meeting with police chiefs from across Hennepin County, we were hearing repeatedly, and I'd heard this before. I used to work in at the Legal Rights Center in Minneapolis, right? We knew that law enforcement knows who the 5 to 10 to 15 kids are, right, that are stealing the cars. But these are really hard cases to prove for a variety of reasons. And this is not just here in Hennepin County, Minnesota, right? This is a problem across the country. But if you look up there was a pretty consistent clearance rate. Clearance rate is the rate at which law enforcement solves the cases that are sent to them and submits a case to our office for charging. Well, just under 4% of auto theft cases in Hennepin County in both 2022 and 2023. So again, just under 4% of the cases for auto theft that are reported in Hennepin County were solved. And in Minneapolis, that number is lower. And again, a variety of reasons for this, right? They run from the car, people are wearing masks. It can be very difficult to identify who was driving, who was in the car. And so what we heard from our law enforcement partners is we know who the young people are, but we can't prove it. And as Mary said, we took system accountability seriously and said, if you know who they are, we have an accountability to try to intervene and offer resources. So we created an intervention pilot that had two critical components. One is an early intervention pathway for folks who were young people who were identified by law enforcement as being involved or they believe they're involved, they're at risk, they have credible information to believe that they're always around the car, they're constantly with the group, but they can't submit a case to prove it. So that's pathway one, is to offer voluntary services outside of the criminal system. Because we don't have a case, right? It has to be voluntary, it has to be outside of the traditional process. And then the second part of this was an expedited legal system process internally for us. If we're going to ask our system partners to work with us to intervene immediately, if you recall the prior slide when I said that's critical, then we need to do the same thing. We can't be waiting months to make a charging decision on cases that do get submitted to us. So we're going to talk through just briefly each of these pathways. So the early intervention pathway. Morgan, did you want to come up and talk a little bit about this pathway?
Yeah, sure.
We'll just kind of go back and forth here.
Yeah, for sure. So the big thing about this pathway was partnering with our law enforcement partners and making sure that we have good communication with them. So to help facilitate that, we set up originally weekly meetings, and now we do bi-weekly meetings where we create space where we can sit down, talk with law enforcement, and understand the concerns that are facing their community. The next piece is creating a uniform way where we can get the cases submitted. So we created a web portal where people can submit information to us and we can stay organized. And then it was dedicating staff. So we've got Sean Cahill here, who's a senior attorney in the office that helps run this program. We have a paralegal who helps with this, and we have a lot of other staff that sit in on these calls and help us deal with these referrals. So when a young person's name comes in, we review them for their system involvement, and then we ultimately make a referral on to a group of social workers who can jump in and provide outreach to the families. Yeah, go ahead.
This works. I'll borrow that one.
Okay.
So just really quick, and then I'll pass it back to Morgan. So we've started to look a bit at the data. We started this in June of 2023. So when we got to June of 2024, we were at 1 year. And so from June of 2023 through the end of May of this year, we had 205 youth referred to our to this pilot initiative by law enforcement, this early intervention pathway. And of those, just over 50% were screened in as eligible. So you might be wondering, well, what about the other 48%? Those were young people who likely were already on probation, already had an active court case, may already be open with child protection. We're not trying to duplicate services. And we're also not trying to criminalize youth, right? And so if information comes into us and we get information that's credible that this young person is involved in behaviors that are putting themselves and others at risk, and they're already open with a social worker through a different part of the county system, we're sharing that so that they can intervene and offer supports and resources to that young person. And the 52% that were screened in had no current contact with a social worker through the county or current system involvement. And so 107 were screened in, and then 105 of those, as of the time that we ran this in June, had been referred to a social worker for outreach. And you're going to hear from Kenneth in a bit here, because he's one of the social workers who has done this work. Talk about where that
Yeah. So we have, at the regular meetings, law enforcement from all over the county are invited to the table. Some of the Hennepin County Sheriff's Office maintains a criminal intelligence unit, so they were a natural group to partner with because they just have a lot of information. So they're the major referral, and then obviously Minneapolis, being the largest city in the county, has a lot of referrals coming in, and we did a lot to build relationships with them. And then you can just sort of see down the road here about where the other referrals are coming from.
Can you just note that Sheriff's Office spans the whole?
Oh yeah, and I'm sorry, and then Sharon just pointed out that the Sheriff's Office referrals are covering youth from all over the county. So they might be sending us a youth who's from Minneapolis, they might be sending us a youth who's from Brooklyn Center or Bloomington. Yeah.
So, what happens once a young person is contacted by a social worker? So when we first started this last summer, we handled these referrals in-house. We used one of our fabulous social workers from our Truancy Be at School program, Kenneth, who's here to talk with you this evening, to go out and connect with youth and families and talk about what was going on and offer services and support. So he's going to tell you about what this actually looks like on the ground. But of those who were referred, 100% had attempted outreach by social workers. Social workers from Hennepin County successfully made contact with 73% of those youth and families. And of those who were successfully contacted, 95% were connected to services and resources. And this can range, right? This could be a need for supportive housing, for re-engagement in school. We also, there's flyers in the back, Family Response Stabilization Services is something not run by our office, but out of the broader county, where folks will be on site anywhere within Hennepin County within 1 hour if a family calls about a crisis, however that's defined for them. And so, it's a whole range, and again, it's individualized, right? Going back to that slide of what makes interventions most effective, it's not a one-size-fits-all model. Some families need access to basic resources, others need help getting their child back into school, others need mental health support for themselves or their child. Every single person has their own unique situation. So with that, I'm going to ask Kenneth to come up and talk about his experience connecting with youth and families as a social worker in this program.
Good evening, everyone. So I was a part of the pilot, and I was the sole social worker within the program. It was a great opportunity for me because of my history in social work for over 30 years, and I've been with the county for almost 17. Yes, please.
Would you speak up? It's really kind of
I certainly will speak up. Okay. Thank you for letting me know. So once the cases were screened and they came to me, then it was my task to connect with these young people. And of course, that first and foremost meant, a phone call, a text, an email, or whatever information I was provided by which I could reach out to this young person or these young people, their families, I would do so. But if those efforts didn't yield any results, then what do? Well, you're a social worker. Socio means to connect. You find a way to connect with these people. And these are young people. These are young people, so you want to connect with them. And they are, to some degree, in harm's way. And they're operating both precariously and in some ways perhaps perilously. So we want to reach them. And so I would go to their homes. And I remember when I was asked in our earlier meetings, are you prepared to go to these people's homes? Like, yeah. Well, I'm a person too. Yeah, I'll go to these people's homes because I'm a person too. And that's really what our work involved. A lot of the people that I was afforded to connect with, I actually had to see them. These were not people just in Minneapolis proper. I saw people from Minneapolis to Eden Prairie to St. Louis Park, even some people who, although they may have been named for something that involved their presence in Hennepin County, some of them even lived in Ramsey, lived in St. Paul. And I would just go to their homes and I would let them know who I was. And I would have to say about that, what was very important, it's important for any social worker, this is not a class in social work, but it's important for any social worker to have a good demeanor when you go to someone's home.
That's right.
If you're showing up, as if you're wanting to provide a message that seemingly is beyond convincing, but perhaps coercive, and you're trying to make folk do something. My role is not to make. My role is to influence, to try to influence, and that has a lot to do with one's demeanor. And I'm not from here. I'm from Los Angeles. Oh, I'm not from Los Angeles only. I'm from South Central Los Angeles. I'm from the hood. Oh, I was born in 1960. I might know a few things, okay? I might have experienced a few things. And so even my own childhood, which was a mixed bag of varying histories, decisions that I made that were good, decisions that were not particularly good, but having some good people in my life, beginning with my parents and my siblings, who in some way I always would default to that as my anchor. I eventually kind of got it together, and but I use all of that, to also inform my work, So it's not really about being, judgmental or finger pointing. It's really not about pointing the finger. It's about trying to lend a hand, trying to be helpful. And so when I would meet these young people and their parents or guardians, I would talk about the program and the services that we had to offer. Most of them wanted the services. And I can tell you this, the young people I spoke with, none of them was disrespectful to me. They all really wanted to turn things around. We didn't want to see them in harm's way, and they themselves didn't want to be in harm's way. They wanted to turn things around, and they welcomed the opportunity to do that. And so this program, for that reason alone, was and is very, very important. The last thing I want to say about my work, some of these families we were able to reach by phone. The good thing about FRSS is that if I reached a family by phone and they were dealing with a crisis right then and there, I would three-way FRSS. They would talk to them, they would pick up where I left off, and they would provide that family with whatever services that family needed. This is not just about me saying something good about something about which I've been a part. It's really a credible and an incredible program that's helped people I know directly that I was involved in, and I appreciated the opportunity to do so.
We're so lucky to have Kenneth on our team and so grateful that he was willing last summer to step up and volunteer to be the social worker who started this work with us, right? Because you can have all the systems in place, but if you don't have the person to go out and do the work and to connect with young people and families, it can't happen. So I just want to point to FRSS. Again, this is not a program out of our office, but this initiative, so after the summer, we ultimately partnered with Hennepin County Behavioral Health, and their social workers are now the ones who do the outreach, right? And this is an example of how we are truly trying to partner in deep and meaningful ways with our community and with our colleagues at the county, with our colleagues in law enforcement, to be able to make meaningful systemic change that holds us accountable, right? If we know a young person is struggling and say there's nothing we can do for you until you hurt yourself or somebody else, that's on us, right? And we need to be accountable for that. And so, the nice thing about FRSS is it's 72 hours initially, so they show up within an hour, it's 72 hours of support. But then they offer an additional, it's all voluntary, 8 weeks of stabilization services, again, to navigate access to the things that you need and exactly what Kenneth is talking about. So this is a first part of our pathway, right? And I'm going to talk with you in a little bit about the data that we're seeing from this. But before we do that, I did tell you there was a second part of this pilot, which is to say if we're going to ask our partners to work with us, to send young people to us before there's a case that can be charged, because we know, again, that interventions with young people are most effective when they're immediate, then we need to hold ourselves at the county attorney's office to the same standard of providing interventions that are immediate. And when we look at our data and it says that we have backlogs in our case charging decisions, that led us to a place of saying we've got to make some changes here. So I'm going to let Morgan talk about that.
Thanks, Sarah. So I think I just want to reflect on what I heard from Kenneth, because I just think that's so true. Strengthening families and strengthening communities is the way out of the problem that we're in, and we're not going to prosecute our way out of the situation. We need to help people and build community. But as Sarah said, sometimes cases do get submitted to us, and we need to act quickly to review them. So when Mary came into office and we refocused our effort on these cases, we did two main things in this area. So one is we worked with our justice partners to create an expedited way of making decisions when youth are in custody. So when a youth does get arrested and brought to our juvenile detention center on a motor vehicle, they are typically released. That's not the type of case that's going to keep someone overnight at the JDC. So before they were released and then the case would come in out of custody, it would take us a couple weeks to review, they would get a court slip, and they'd be coming into court a month, 2 months after an incident happened. And that's just not acceptable. You can't bring in someone 2 months after it happened and try to make a big court case out of it. And so we worked with our justice partners to expedite that process. And so now when a youth is released from the JDC and sent home on a motor vehicle theft, they are given a court slip for 3 days later. Day one, we are working with our police partners to get that case to us. Day two, we're reviewing it and we're deciding, are we going to divert this to great organizations like We Push for Peace and other folks here? Are we going to charge this and bring it into court? What are we going to do? We're doing that in day two, and then on day three, they are in court, in person, before a judge. And we also worked with our partners because we said we don't want to force these families to come into court and have nothing happen. So we worked with our probation department to offer services to these youth. So it's not, they come into court, they get a public defender, they're offered voluntary services right on that third day, and it's been a really successful program from probation's view, from our point of view. So that's the first piece, the first thing that we did. The second thing that we did is we had not adequately staffed our motor vehicle response for a long, long time. We had essentially one attorney that focused on these cases, and it is a huge caseload. And so Sean, who I mentioned before, became a senior attorney in charge of our motor vehicle theft team. We dedicated 4 attorneys to this team. We have some paralegals that help support it, and we just flooded the zone with staff to be able to review these cases and make these decisions in a really timely manner. There's some statistics up here that indicate the progress that we've made. We still have more progress to make, and this is a commitment that we have. We are going to continue to push in this area to make our decisions much more quickly.
Thank you, Morgan. So, it's a two-pronged approach here in our youth auto theft early intervention, and we've said it from the beginning, and we want to be accountable, right? Not just to do things that we feel good about, but that actually make an impact and make a difference. And so we've started to look at the data, and so as we look at that, one of the measures we look at is, are the young people that we're serving having new cases, right? And we needed to set a cutoff period, because again, recall that we ran this data at the end of May, at the beginning of June, end of May. And so we needed enough time. I don't want to stand before you and say, well, people who were referred to us on May 30th as of May 31st had no new cases, right? Like, that's not meaningful to folks. So we picked March 31st as the cutoff date. And this was an informed decision, informed by data which demonstrates that historically, young people in the context of youth auto theft behavior pick up new cases very, very quickly. And as Mary mentioned earlier, what we were hearing from the crime analysts at the sheriff's office is that they were escalating within a matter of months from auto theft from being in a passenger in a stolen car to an armed robbery. So we knew it was escalating quickly. We wanted to interrupt that. So this is the first year of data, but we did a cutoff on March 31st. So there was 95 youth between June 2023 and end of March 2024 who were referred to a social worker for services. 81% of those young people had no new cases come in. Right, which is huge. Again, especially in light of what we know about the recidivism rate connected to, it's on one of the first slides I put up there, but it was in the range of 50 to 60% for young people who are charged with auto theft. So that's one measure, but we're also trying to look more broadly at what's happening in Hennepin County, right? Because we know auto theft and the behaviors that result from auto theft are really concerning for our community. We heard that right away when Mary came into office. And so we compared the time period of January through May of 2023, before this pilot started, to January through May of 2024, when the pilot had been up and running for several months, to look at how many motor vehicle thefts were being reported across Hennepin County. And what we saw is that there was a 30% drop across the county in terms of number of auto thefts being reported. Now, you're never going to hear me stand up here and take full credit for that type of data point. That's a huge drop. It's critically important. But this type of pilot initiative, where this didn't cost money. We didn't ask for more money to do this. We reallocated our resources, right, to do things differently, to partner more effectively within our office, with our community, with our partners. And this is the type of result you can see from that. We're here in Minneapolis, so we wanted to show you the data that the auto theft report across the county, but also across every precinct in Minneapolis, dropped in that same time period. And then another measure is how many auto theft cases was our office receiving? Now, keep in mind, we don't know when an auto theft is reported, if it was a youth or an adult, unless a case comes to us, right? And that clearance rate, as I mentioned to you before, hovers around 4%. So 96% of the cases that come into law enforcement, we actually don't know if that was a young person or an adult. But if we want to break it down by what's happening with young people, what we did is we took a look at the submissions to our office related to youth auto theft. And in that same time period comparison, the first 5 months of 2023 when this wasn't in place versus the first 5 months of 2024 when this had been in place, we saw a 48% drop in cases referred to our office by law enforcement, and the clearance rate stayed pretty much the same, which leads us to believe it's a real drop in auto theft related behaviors by young people. So this is, high level overview of what we're doing and an example of how we're trying to change the way we do our work out of our office to partner with community, to have an impact, to improve outcomes for young people, for families, for communities, because what we know is that it's deeply intertwined, right? Better outcomes for young people means better public safety for our community. You cannot separate those two. So thanks for listening. I'm going to pass it back to Mary for some questions and discussion.
Thank you. I wanted to pick up on what Sarah said. When I came into office, we were focused on changing the way we approach the system, but it wasn't separate and apart from public safety. And I think that's where some people get it wrong. This is public safety, right? Yeah. If we're keeping kids in partnership with others from coming into the system, from escalating their behavior, from engaging in behavior that's dangerous to themselves and others, that is about public safety. I was thinking, Kenneth, when you were talking, I do need to point out, so Kenneth, when we started this, it was during the summer, Kenneth is a social worker for our Be It School truancy diversion program. And so he talked about his role here. At some point, we did hand it over to Hennepin County social workers, and one interesting thing to me is that the number of people actually connected with has dropped quite a bit from when Kenneth was doing it. And I don't know what's going on the other end of it, but I can say, listening to you, Kenneth, and the care in which you take, and driving all over the place, and really the goal is to connect, is so important. So I want to thank you for your work. So I'm going to open it up for questions.
Can you say what FFRS is?
Family response stabilization.
Family Response Stabilization Service, FRSS. There's a brochure back there on it.
You should support and stability. It's right there.
Here it is. So you should pick up a brochure. It's Family Response, as Sarah was describing it, but it's an incredible resource. And it doesn't have to come through anyone in particular. You can give it to a family that's struggling. You can call. So please pick up one of these. It's a fabulous resource that not enough people know about. Thanks, Joanna, for pointing out. Using
I think
acronyms.
there's a couple questions over here.
Marvina.
That was kind of my question, because I've been following this whole pilot program, and I really appreciate the work that you're doing and the way that you're identifying the youth needs all over Minneapolis and Hennepin County. I know that you had spoke about not having specific law enforcement officers refer cases to you. But now I just heard you talk about, now is it open where families and community members like myself can now refer cases over? If we find a youth that is at risk and we don't actually have the resources ourselves to intervene, there's a number now for the community to?
Yeah, so the question was, when we've talked about our program, we get referrals from law enforcement. And so Marvina's question was, what can we as community do? So the family response, that number that I'm talking about, is actually a county program. And so anyone can access that.
Okay.
That's not actually, it's one of the resources that Kenneth talked about that. And he talked about being in the homes of people and realizing there's a crisis and calling this very service to have them come out and help the family.
But it's a separate program?
Yes.
Okay. So
Yeah.
it's a different entity, but
Yes.
that service is available?
Yes. And that's why I was saying, grab a brochure, put that number in your phone. When you see hear of a family in crisis, a young person, call them.
Okay.
Jake,
Yeah, you referenced it.
wait, we were trying to get a microphone, so questions can be heard.
Change the batteries.
Okay, you referenced something changed. Kenneth is no longer the social worker.
Yes.
And are they county social workers now that are doing it? And can you explain why?
Yes, so the social workers are the social workers that are embedded with law enforcement agencies. That's something that the county has been doing. So what changed was the percentage of families that are actually reached. My recollection when Kenneth was doing it was about above 90%. It was 98%. So in other words, we get referrals, Kenneth would reach out to them, he would make contact with 98% of those people, right?
It's like 75 now.
It's 75% now. And so it is big, it is big, it is big. And that's something that we will reach out and see if we can figure out maybe what the issue is there. The other thing that we haven't mentioned is that this has been so successful. It is about auto theft, and law enforcement have asked us to expand it to other types of offenses. But that requires the county to put more resources towards it. So that's what you all can do. Contact your commissioner. Yes, yes.
One thing that, I never worked for the county before Mary became county attorney, and I think one thing that can be a little bit confusing is we talk about Hennepin County and then we talk about the Hennepin County Attorney's Office. And Hennepin County Attorney's Office is funded by Hennepin County, but it's its own separate entity with its own elected. And when we're talking about, working with behavioral health social workers from Hennepin County, those are folks who are in a separate entity, right? They report up through Hennepin County commissioners. It's a different, so I just want to make sure folks are clear because I didn't quite understand before I came to Hennepin County quite how large it was and the way that this work can be divided up. But I do also want to say, even though the percentage has dropped and it is something we're working on, this is a partnership, right? And I think so often the narrative out there about what we're doing is that we're doing this alone and we're going it alone and we're just way out ahead of anybody, and this is a partnership. We created this with law enforcement, we're doing it with our Hennepin County partners and our community partners. Jen, you see?
And I'm going to give a shout out to Jen White here. She is the director of Director of Community Affairs, and her team did all the work to make this happen.
Hi there, Stephen London in Minneapolis, and I'm curious, is there room for improvement in the partnership with law enforcement? Specifically, is there room for improvement with MPD?
Yes. The question was, is there room for improvement with MPD? And I would say yes. We need referrals to be able to do this program. We've seen a little bit of a slowdown there lately. And so, yes, we do need law enforcement to make the referrals to us.
Hi, I'm Connie, Executive Director of Restoration Inc. I really want to commend you all because having started many programs from the ground up, those statistics are excellent. So I just want to give you guys a shout out for that pilot and stepping out and taking a risk using positive youth development, which a lot of times people don't really think about how a young person develops. My question is that is there a way that other community organizations can partner with you all as we move forward into this? Because it's gonna take a lot of people, all of us working together, right? So I heard you saying you work with We Push for Peace, and I love the work that they do. And I think that that's a good model to bring in other organizations, as well as looking at social services people. Now I was gonna ask you, are they coming from Hennepin County Medical Center, or are they inside of all different kinds of Hennepin County organizations?
So that's a great question. It kind of goes to what Sarah was talking about. It's interesting, I've worked for Hennepin County my entire career, always called it Hennepin County. Then when I became the Hennepin County attorney, everybody in the office referred to Hennepin County as Big County. So we have Big County and we have the county attorney's office. So We Push for Peace contracts with DOCCR, probation in the county, so they contract with the county. We have diversion programs. So we have the authority to decide, and Morgan was talking about this too, are we going to divert a particular person, case, to a diversion program. And then when we do, it goes to one of those partners that contracts with the county. Now, I'm sure, I'm looking at you, Trey, we push for peace. I'm sure anybody who's tried to contract with the county can tell you that can be an uphill climb, simply because they're used to dealing with people. I mean, it's a lot of hoops to jump through, right? And they do have a program to help people be able to apply. But so there are groups that contract directly with probation, or with the county through probation. We have also started to directly contract with certain organizations to do youth group violence intervention. And so we're trying to increase our capacity, our ability to work with community partners that we know are effective. There's a little bit of a, I was talking to some commissioners this morning actually, and I hear this sometimes. It's like, these programs shouldn't live with prosecutors, shouldn't be in the county attorney's office. And before I got here, I might have agreed with that. And my answer to that is, well, somebody has to do it, right? And we are going to try to use our resources and partner. We know there are so many of you out in the community that are doing this work. And we know it's hard to partner with the county sometimes, just contracting purposes. So we are trying to use some of our resources to do that. We also do it with our Be It School truancy diversion program. So it's a bit of a kind of a, in trying to get the resources, the money to be able to contract with people directly, or to kind of persuade the county to contract with providers that we think are really doing the work, is really a partnership. It's trying to persuade in some ways. It's trying to convince county commissioners, hey, give us these resources because we do want to do these programs. So it's a constant, we're in budget season now, which is one of the reasons I was having the conversations with commissioners. And it's a push. It's a push because there are some with the philosophy that social workers should not even exist in the county attorney's office. I don't know if you've ever heard that. Yeah, I was actually asked, could you call your social workers something else? I said, I don't care what you call them. I mean, we want them because they're an essential part of the work that we do. But there's a lot of work that has to happen to effectively partner with the county. The county's just huge. It has all kinds of different departments. They're working on a lot of things. And it's sometimes hard, and we have to be patient to work through all that.
Can I just add one?
Sure,
thing to this? Thank you for joining us, and I would echo what Mary said, but I also want to add that we recently were one of 3 jurisdictions in the country to receive a federal grant focused on youth justice transformation. And part of that grant is changing how we're expanding our diversion work. And we're going to be putting out an RFP this fall to expand, and we are really hoping to connect. And so, for Restoration Inc. and other folks who are in the room who are really interested in working with us, we are trying to cut through some of those barriers to really collaborate, because what we know is, as I said earlier, young people are best served in their communities, right? And by people who have shared life experiences, who look like that, right? And come from their communities. We said earlier, relational, community-based. And so we know that the vast majority of young people that get referred to our office by law enforcement are Black and brown young people, right? And so we really want to make sure that we are providing resources, and that's part of this RFP process. I would suggest connecting with Morgan. And then I just wanted to answer your question about the social workers. They're now the social workers who are embedded, so by behavioral health in the police departments. And then the last thing, so Mary mentioned our youth group violence intervention. I thought I saw Antonio here.
Antonio's here in the back.
Okay.
Got
For
Mohammed here, KJ as well.
KJ's
So
here, one of our
here.
providers, right? And Mohammed, I thought I saw too. And so, so Antonio works with Safe Communities, with the county, and we went in 50-50 on funding YGVI. So we took $250,000 out of our own budget to say we're going to fund community-based programming for young people because we care about, because we know this works, right? And so that's for young people who are group and gun involved, so.
We have another question here.
I did want to say, so Sarah mentioned we were one of 3 jurisdictions in the entire country to get that very coveted grant, and Sarah wrote the proposal. So big shout out, I know she hates that I do that, but it's huge, it's huge.
Hello, I have a question, well, I have several questions, hopefully I have time for them all, but 2 in particular. When I hear you say you're getting referrals from police departments, and I think about certain police departments and how they aren't necessarily cutting mustard right now according to the state standards, how are you implementing standards to ensure that they aren't targeting youth? And so, hold on, let me see exactly how I wrote it down, because what are the checks in place to ensure youth aren't being targeted? Because if I want a youth who I think is a gang member, I can just say, hey, I think they're still in the car. So what checks do you have in place against that? And when you talked about the 70s, I'm sorry. And then, Ms. Moriarty, you said that who is going to do this work? And so I wonder if, Ms. Davis, I work with some friend of yours at the Minnesota Legal Rights Center, if maybe that's some work that the Legal Rights Center could take on, being a community advocate there, being adjacent with that social worker work, because I do believe it's a work that we can do. And housing it in the county attorney's office can be kind of daunting. So is that work community-based organizations? Because we do work with the public defender's office, so that community-based organizations who already have a working relationship with the county's office could try to take on with some of their employees.
Thank you so much for the question. I saw your shirt when you came in and I knew you were an LRC person, so thank you for being here. Okay, so the first question is, what are the checks and balances? A couple things. One is, so there's data privacy issues related to this. And so we are allowed under the law to take the information in. We do a file clearance is what we call it, check through each of the systems to see if the young person is already open. So that's the youth prosecution side, child protection side of our work. But we don't want to be net widening, and we're not trying to criminalize. And so we have said from day one, and we have endured some pushback as a result of it, but we have continued to say we will not share back information about individual youth with law enforcement. We just won't do it. Also, we don't have all the information that they might want. Even if we did, we couldn't, first of all, we can't and we wouldn't. Because this is not about criminalization. This is about a voluntary pathway to supports and services. And quite frankly, all the national research shows that voluntary interventions are the most effective, right? We know that, and this data proves that out. So I appreciate the question. We talk a lot with our partners about net widening and about the concerns related to net widening, and we are really actively working to make sure that we're not doing that. I think to your second point, we look at everything that we do. So, when we wrote this federal grant, we built in funds to be able to fund community specifically, right? But there are pieces of this that have to be held by an entity like this file clearance about folks who have access to the data, right? So in our office, we have lawyers who can see child protection files, which Legal Rights Center can't do. We push for peace, restoration. No matter where you are in the community, you don't have, for good reason, right? Like that's private data about people and their families. And we're not even talking about the child protection system here today and the racial disparities in that system, right? And so we want to be really mindful that we're being really cautious about that. So there are pieces of this that need to be held within entities that can make these decisions. And to Mary's point earlier, there's certainly opportunities for non-prosecutors to lead in these spaces. And also, until that happens, we're gonna keep pushing and we're gonna keep doing this work and building sustainable systems to off-ramp young people from the systems that we know cause harm and to get them into community-based places where they can be successful and have a much more positive trajectory. So thank you for the questions.
Hi, my name is Patience. I am the Youth Justice Case Manager at Safe Zone in St. Paul, but a Minneapolis resident. And I have 2 questions, one with regard to confidentiality of youth and their information, and it at the crossroads of cybersecurity and information being hacked and leaked about them, such as like hacks as big as the Minneapolis Public Schools, where information about just really serious things that have happened to youth, as well as their criminal background is exposed, and how that can affect their future outcomes, their job outlooks, and everything.
I think we can try to answer that to the best of our ability. I'm probably gonna pass the mic to Morgan, who in addition to running our youth prosecution division is much more tech savvy than I am, and can talk a little bit about the protections that we have. But I think part of what I hear you asking is how are we making sure that we're not criminalizing young people for behaviors or for engagements that they're having with folks in a social services capacity, like a social worker at school, and how are we making, Mary mentioned and I mentioned earlier, we're really intentional about that in our own systems, but certainly we're familiar with the fact that, hacks happen. Minneapolis Public Schools is a huge system unto itself, and when that information becomes public, how is it used? And I guess a couple things. One is under Mary's administration, our prerogative and our focus is problem solving, right? And so that's sort of across all of the work that we're doing. And so we have an expectation of our attorneys when they're reviewing cases that are coming before them, that they're thinking about it from a problem solving lens. Not that they're, thinking about it from like, how do we criminalize this young person and send them to prison or a youth facility for as long as possible. And so that doesn't directly answer the issue that you're getting at, because we don't have, law enforcement doesn't work for us, right? So we don't have control over their access to information that's been made public. But we do have control over how our attorneys are working with the cases that are being submitted to them and expectations. And part of that is about training our attorneys in some of what we gave a brief overview to you all about tonight, which is how do we expect folks to do our work from a problem solving lens in terms of improving outcomes. So I'm going to pass it to Morgan to talk a little bit more about this question.
Yeah, I think the only thing I will add is that is a really smart question. Data security is hugely important. We do a lot within the county and within the county attorney's office to make sure that our data is secure. All of our staff have to be trained yearly. You can only operate on our systems with our county issued computers. We do multi-factor authentication. We do data sharing agreements with some of our partners to make sure that any data we share out is properly protected. But you're absolutely right. It's a huge concern with all the data that's out there, and it's something that we just always need to continuously stay on top of to make sure we protect the data for everyone, and especially for you.
We applied for a grant through an organization. We got the grant, but it took us practically a year to get into an agreement with them, partly because they wanted a lot more of our data than we were comfortable with. They wanted identifiable data, we said no, and we held to that, and we worked out an agreement where we get the grant, but we're not sharing identifiable data. So I could just say we're very intentional and thoughtful about that, understanding what the consequences could be. You had a second question.
Yeah, my second question was with regard to, I really appreciate this meeting because I felt like I got to learn a lot more, like information and data that typically isn't translated in my perspective amongst the media and within journalism. How is your office collaborating with community members to do some of that narrative shift that has been really, really hard to see any of, but unless you're here, you would know?
That's the $100,000 question. We actually had a press conference about this. Very few media showed up, and the article about it was very deep in some section, and it just said Hennepin County. It has been a big challenge, getting the narrative out there about the great stuff that our staff is doing. And there's a lot more that we could talk about. So we are, in our new communications director, Lynette is back there, we are trying to strategize about how do we work with the community more to get this information out there. Because if you don't know about it, as you said, you don't know that this is happening. And I've talked to people who said, who I thought would know better, like, oh, have you heard of our youth auto initiative? No, why have I never heard of that? And so it's kind of like, this is one of the reasons we're doing this town hall and intend to do more to try to get this out there. But if you have any particular ideas or connections, we'd love to hear them.
Or just show up and play 3-on-3.
Just show up and play 3-on-3, yeah.
Once a week.
Once a week. I think I lasted 10 minutes. Yes.
Yeah, so Curtis Ray with We Push for Peace. One of the questions that we had when we were dealing with the youth was how could we get to them before they were in the system? Like mandated reporters in schools, do we have people who are trying to identify people who are caught up in other things other than auto theft, who might be dealing drugs, and we can go talk to them before they get arrested and try to keep that from becoming a criminal case on that part? Is that?
Yeah, and I think Sarah mentioned, or I mentioned this, we have been asked to expand this to stuff other than auto theft. That requires the county to expend more resources on it, on this type of program. But we are always interested in how we can figure out how to partner with YGBI. That's a new pathway, by the way, that we just started. Before, the county had YGBI, but the young person had to be on probation. Now, the young person doesn't have to be on probation. And Jen, maybe you can talk about how do people refer to that? Just as we're always looking for pathways, just as you said, we want to intervene before a young person gets into the system. When they get in, we're trying to divert, we're trying to make sure that they get the help they need before it becomes more entrenched. But Jen, maybe you can talk a little bit about YGBI.
Sure. So YGBI is kind of similar in that it's youth before they're in the system, and it's youth on the radar for at-risk behavior, more centered around violence though, gun violence and other violence, or family members who are involved in a lifestyle, either as being a perpetrator or a victim. So that's just another pathway, and it is similar in that it comes from our referrals come from law enforcement. However, since we're in the county attorney's office, I've told community folks, if there's folks on your radar, I could fill out the referral form, right? Because technically I'm a systems person in law enforcement, so we could do it that way too. And in that initiative, we've been partnering with Mo, with Touch Outreach, and a couple other community partners, Brown with Urban Youth Conservation, but really how are we getting then kids before they're on probation, just exactly what you're talking about. But I think our goal really is to build out more pathways. So how are we taking those referrals directly from community? How are we getting them from the schools? And what does that have to look like in order to get the approvals that we need through a judge's order to get those to come in that way? Recognizing if they're already on law enforcement radar, right? Like they're already watching them, but we in community, we need to be able to refer our young people too. Yeah. So, yep.
So I want to thank everybody that's here and our team that's up this side. To me, this is really true public safety, that we work together, that we are trying to work with young people to make sure that they don't get into the system, or if they are, to intervene in a positive way. And so this is one way we're trying to do this. We're working on many other ways, and we're just honored to work with all of you in the community. So thank you so much for coming, and if there's more pizza and chicken, please help yourself.